Hi, this podcast will cover a section of your ecology unit notes, specifically learning targets 1 and 2, which are abiotic and biotic factors, and then food chains and webs. When you watch this podcast, I recommend split screening with Notability and having your ecology unit notes open so you can follow along. In ecology, we talk about all the different levels of life and non-living things that make up the biosphere. The biosphere is all life on Earth and all parts of Earth where life exists. Since this unit is titled Ecology, we should probably go over what the word ecology actually means. The word ecology means the study of organisms and their environment. So we look at organisms and we look at where they live, what they're eating, who they're interacting with, and their non-living parts of their habitat as well. Ecology looks at several different levels of organizations. We start at the smallest level, which is the individual organism. Look at that organism for a second and see if you can identify what type of organism it is. If you said a wildebeest, you are correct. So an individual would represent just one single wildebeest. Next, we have a population. A population is a group of the same species. So in that picture, you can see we have a group of wildebeests. So that would be considered a population because they are all the same species. Next, we have a community. Community are all the living populations that make up a certain area. So in this picture, we have the wildebeests. You can see them running. And then you also have a population of zebra. And if we're considering all the living parts of the community, you can also consider the grass as part of the community as well, because a population of plants is also a part of the community. So a community is all the living things within a certain area. Next, you have an ecosystem. An ecosystem is going to be all the living and non-living parts. So we still have the grass and the wildebeests and the zebras and the trees, but now we're also taking into consideration the air, the land, the mountains, the soil, and the water. Okay, that all the ecosystem is made up of all the living and the non-living parts. Next, when we take ecosystems and they are in the same area and have a similar climate, we call those biomes. So biomes are areas of the world, ecosystems of the world that share similar temperature averages throughout the year and similar precipitation averages throughout the year. And then the broadest level that we look at in ecology is the biosphere, which is the whole planet, all the living and non-living parts working together. All right, now we're going to practice the information we just learned. So we're going to practice those levels of organization. So in this picture, what level of organization do you see? If you said an individual, you are correct. Okay, now what level of organization would this be? If you said population, you are correct. Okay, now we have multiple populations of living things together. If you said community, you are correct. Okay, now we have all the populations of living things, but you'll see some non-living things in there as well. We have sunlight, we have the atmosphere, water, there's some rocks in there. What level of organization is this? If you said ecosystem, you are correct. Now let's talk about the difference between two factors that make up ecology, biotic factors and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are going to be living or once living things. So the word bio or the prefix bio actually means life. So the prefix bio means life. So biotic factors literally translates as a living thing. Now, if we look at abiotic factors, the prefix a before something usually means without or no. So this is without life. So abiotic factors are non-living things. So this would be things like mountains or rocks or soil, rain, precipitation, air, temperature. Okay, so abiotic things are non-living things, whereas biotic are living things. And it's an important thing to distinguish if something has died. So if you have a dead twig in your hand or a dead stick, that is still considered a biotic thing because it was once living. And the big question that we're going to try to have you guys focus on this unit is, could these biotic factors that you see on the left, could they survive without the abiotic factors? So think about that for a second. Could the living things on this planet survive without the non-living things? And hopefully you said no, because there is no way we could survive without a balance of abiotic factors, which is a reason why it's so important to care for our planet. Okay, the next topic we're going to talk about is learning target number 2, how organisms get their energy. The first type of organisms we'll talk about are autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that can produce their own food. The word autotroph, auto, the prefix auto, actually means self, and troph means to feed. So the word means self-feed, and that's exactly what an autotroph can do. They can produce their own food. Some plants or some organisms do photosynthesis to produce their own food. There are other organisms that do chemosynthesis to produce their own food. Autotrophs can also be called primary producers. So those two words mean the same thing. A producer can produce their own food. Autotroph can produce their own food. And again, I mentioned that photosynthesis is one way that a producer can make their own food. That is using the sunlight. So plants, for example, do photosynthesis to produce their own food. And some organisms do chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is when organisms use the chemicals they find in the environment around them to produce their own food. On the previous slide, I showed you an example of deep sea mussels that can do chemosynthesis and make their own food. And again, autotrophs and primary producers mean the same thing. They can both make their own food. The next way that organisms can get their own food is by eating another organism. So organisms that need to get food from other organisms are known as heterotrophs. We can also call them consumers. Those two words mean the same thing. It's an organism that needs to get food by eating another organism. If you look at the word heterotroph, hetero means other, and troph means to feed. So this word literally translates as other feeder, which means they have to feed on other things. These are some examples that you see on the slide of organisms that are heterotrophs. Humans being one of them. We are heterotrophs, which means we need to eat to get our energy. Now, there are different types of heterotrophs, which means certain animals eat certain things to get their energy. Herbivores, for example, eat plants, leaves, seeds, and fruits. These animals that you see in the picture only eat these things to get their energy. They do not consume other animals, just plants. If you are a vegan, you would be considered an herbivore. Carnivores are heterotrophs that kill and eat other animals. So they are eating other animals. On this image here, you see a bunch of different carnivores. Carnivores are predators. They kill and eat other animals only. Next, you have omnivores. Omnivores eat both plants and other animals. Humans would be considered omnivores because we eat both plants and other animals. Again, if you're a vegetarian, if you're a vegan, you are an herbivore. But the rest of us that eat a little bit of both are considered omnivores. The other animals you see in this picture here all eat plants and other animals or insects. The next type of heterotroph we're going to talk about are scavengers. Scavengers get their energy by eating animals that are already dead or feces. So organisms like vultures and hyenas, flies, crustaceans, these organisms are scavengers, which means they will eat other animals, but they prefer them to be already dead. Next, we have decomposers. Decomposers decompose dead plant and animal matter. And decompose means to break down. So decomposers, fungi and bacteria that you see in this picture, actually when they consume things, they decompose it and they break it down and change its form. So they break down dead plants, they break down dead animal matter, and they turn it into something called detritus. Detritus is just kind of like a big mushy pile of dead plant and animal matter. So decomposers are extremely important because they're the ones that are kind of taking everything that has died and kind of decomposing it and putting all those nutrients into our soil. So decomposers, when you think of all those dead leaves on the bottom of the forest floor, decomposers are going to work to decompose them and get rid of them and take those nutrients and not only provide it to themselves, but also put it into the soil. And then our last type of heterotroph is a detritivore. A detritivore is one that's going to chew or grind that detritus that the decomposer made. So remember, decomposers are decomposing that dead plant and animal matter, or feces, and we call that decomposing matter, we call that detritus. And a detritivore, like the ones you see in this image here, will eat that detritus. Okay, so a lot of times if you think of like an earthworm, you think, well, earthworms eat soil. And technically that's kind of right because detritus is all throughout the soil, the decomposing dead plant and animal matter, and those organisms eat it. All right, thank you so much for watching this podcast on Learning Targets 1 and 2. We learned the difference between abiotic and biotic factors, and then we talked about all the different ways that organisms can get their energy. Now would be a great time to open up Quizlet and practice some of these words.